X-Men franchise has always been a fascinating part of the gaming world, with a history full of both iconic hits and forgettable flops. For every memorable success like Konami's classic arcade game or the Genesis title that cleverly required a restart to advance, there's a lesser known counterpart like the quickly forgotten X-Men Destiny. But what about the X-Men games that never even made it past the planning stages at Xavier's School for Gifted Youngsters? The ones that were held back or ultimately failed to see the light of day. Let's spotlight these oddities today. I am Lady Decade, and these are the intriguing X-Men games that were astonishingly cancelled. The X-Men have experienced both soaring heights and crushing lows in the gaming industry. Some of their most celebrated titles emerged from collaborations with Capcom, like the iconic fighting games, or from the X-Men Legends series, which revitalized dungeon crawling for a new generation. However, not all of their ventures were as successful. Team-based games on the NES and even a 16-bit collaboration with Spider-Man fell short of expectations. In fact, over time the mutants were even sidelined from major crossovers, as Disney saw little value in promoting characters they didn't hold the movie rights for. But with Disney's acquisition of Fox's film and television assets, the X-Men have found a new life in the critically acclaimed X-Men 97, a popular series that functions as a direct follow-up to the X-Men Fox Kids show in the 90s. Speaking of this glorious bygone era, this was during the decade when both Street Fighter II rose to prominence, and later the game's epic crossovers with X-Men and the rest of the Marvel Universe. The sprite-based Street Fighter games are all now considered all-time classics, which makes it all the cooler that they stuffed 16 of them onto one compilation with the fantastic Street Fighter 30th Anniversary Collection. Now, in the era of Street Fighter 6 and its main competitor Tekken 8, both of these franchises are as relevant as ever. I can get you huge discounts of up to 90% on thousands of games via my affiliate link in the pinned comment. These of course include the 30th Anniversary Collection, Tekken 8, Street Fighter 6, and even its brand new Season 2 pass, which allows you to play as M. Bison. There are so many great games to play today, which is why it's so important to take advantage of these amazing deals. Happy shopping. While the X-Men are currently riding high, not every planned adventure has made it to the finish line. While X-Men Origins Magneto may be the most infamous cancelled film project, the video game world has seen its own share of high-profile failures. 3 such projects stand out for their publicised potential but never managed to see the light of day. The Incredible Hulk, The Amazing Spider-Man, half of the Fantastic Four including the Human Torch and The Thing. What do all of these heroes have in common that the X-Men do not? They all starred in titles from Adventure International on 8-bit computers during the mid-1980s, with games released on platforms like the Apple II, Commodore 64, Acorn, Electron, ZX Spectrum, MSX, TRS-80, Atari and DOS. These titles were part of the Quest Probe series, born from a 1983 licensing agreement with Marvel Comics. This 10-year deal was notable for being Marvel's first long-term licensing agreement signed on the 1st of December 1983. Scott Adams, the CEO of Adventure International and a lifelong Marvel fan, spearheaded the project. The legendary Marvel writer John Byrne, known for his work on Uncanny X-Men, Fantastic Four and Alpha Flight, provided a loose plot overview for the series, while Marvel's Bob Budiansky oversaw the creative direction. Byrne's influence was significant. Soon after the release of the Quest Probe games, he would go on to reboot Superman in the groundbreaking The Man of Steel miniseries, following DC's Crisis on Infinite Earths, a series that introduced the concept of variant comic book covers. Despite the involvement of such prominent figures and the early promise of the Quest Probe series, the X-Men never got their chance to shine in the lineup, leaving this potential game as one of the most intriguing what-ifs in the history of Marvel video games. The first title in the Quest Probe series, Quest Probe featuring the Hulk, was chosen for its iconic protagonist and was released on the 1st of May 1984. This text-adventure game was unique for being bundled with a comic book, enhancing the experience for fans. Following the successful launch of The Hulk's Adventure, a second title was developed with the help of Al Milgrom, who was simultaneously working on the Spectacular Spider-Man series. The Quest Probe series continued with the release of Quest Probe featuring Human Torch and The Thing in 1985. However, the series met an untimely end when Adventure International, the company behind these games, went bankrupt during the development of the fourth installment, Quest Probe featuring the X-Men. Although Scott Adams had already completed some of the coding for the X-Men game, the financial collapse of the company meant that the game was never finished, leaving it as an unfinished chapter in the history of Marvel video games. The Quest Probe series was originally intended to be a 12-issue miniseries, but the cancellation after the third installment left some of its elements in limbo. The unfinished Quest Probe featuring the X-Men was meant to be accompanied by a tie-in comic, which ultimately found a home in Marvel Fanfare in 1987. Although the series was cut short, its plot threads and characters didn't completely disappear. Elements from the series made their way into the Quasar comic, and the Chief Examiner character was later included in the official handbook of the Marvel Universe Deluxe Edition 2, ensuring a small legacy within Marvel Comics. Interestingly, the unfinished Quest Probe X-Men game resurfaced years later, when the Adventurers Guild website offered a chance to explore the incomplete title directly from Scott Adams' collection. Among the playable sections of the game was an encounter with Magneto, the X-Men's frequent nemesis. Since the original pitch of the game, Magneto had evolved into a complex character who, more often than not, has served as a reluctant hero and ally to the X-Men. This unexpected appearance of Magneto in the unfinished game adds an intriguing layer to the history of the X-Men in video games, highlighting how the character's role has shifted over time in the Marvel Universe. As an unfinished text adventure, Quest Probe featuring the X-Men was set to include characters like Cyclops, Toad, Professor X and Mesmero. Given that this project was developed in the mid-1980s, it predates Jim Lee's iconic revival of the X-Men franchise, which later helped establish characters like Gambit, Rogue and Psylocke as core members of the team. At the time, the X-Men roster and the series' tone were quite different, and this game would have reflected the era's character dynamics and storytelling style. Without the influence of Jim Lee's 1990s revival, the game would have offered a snapshot of the X-Men before they evolved into the versions of the characters many fans know today. Now, let's talk about another fascinating but unrealised X-Men project, X-Women, the Sinister Virus. Marvel has only published one comic titled X-Women, a Chris Claremont story brought to life by the renowned artist Milo Manara, known for his distinctive, somewhat provocative style. However, about a decade ago, Marvel released a series simply titled X-Men, written by Brian Wood, which featured an all-female roster. This team included some of the most iconic women in the X-Men universe: Storm, the powerful weather goddess; Psylocke, the psychic ninja; Jubilee, the energetic firecracker who has also been an occasional vampire and adoptive mother; Kitty Pryde, who can phase through walls; Rachel Grey, the time-displaced daughter of Cyclops and Jean Grey; and Rogue, the Southern Belle with the ability to absorb others' powers. This lineup showcased the depth and diversity of the X-Men universe, proving that not every iteration of the team needs to include staples like Cyclops or Wolverine to be compelling. During this period, Marvel was experimenting with their lineup by bringing fresh perspectives and new dynamics to their teams. Just as Spider-Man joining the Avengers once seemed unimaginable but is now a well-established part of the Marvel Universe, this all-female X-Men team demonstrated that creative shifts could lead to some of the most interesting and beloved stories in the franchise's history. X-Women, the Sinister Virus was a title that, had it been released, would have predated Brian Wood's X-Men comic series by about a decade and a half. The game's premise was intriguing, with the male heroes incapacitated by the Genesis virus, engineered by the villainous Mr. Sinister. It was up to the female members of the X-Men to save the day, and yes, the irony of a game featuring the Genesis virus on the Sega Genesis is certainly not lost on anyone. Developed by Clockwork Tortoise, the studio responsible for the Genesis and Sega CD versions of The Adventures of Batman and Robin, the game was set to showcase a lineup of powerful X-Women, including Storm, Rogue and Phoenix, about half the team that would later appear in the X-Men comics series. X-Women, the Sinister Virus was previewed at E3 in 1996 and was intended to be marketed alongside the Game Gear release of X-Men Mojo World, serving as a follow-up to the successful X-Men toon Clone Wars. Sadly, despite the promising concept and the anticipation generated by its E3 appearance, the game never made it to store shelves. The cancellation left fans wondering what could have been, as the title promised to deliver a unique experience centered around the franchise's formidable female heroes. Clockwork Tortoise disbanded soon after previewing XMen, the Sinister virus, which likely contributed to the game's cancellation. Without the original developer, Sega may have decided against restarting the project with another studio, leaving it to fade into obscurity. Our best glimpse into what could have been comes from a brief trailer on YouTube showcasing the three heroines, Storm, Phoenix and Rogue, flying across the screen. This suggests that the game might have been more of a flying adventure title rather than a traditional platformer. Each character's flight abilities would have made them distinct, Storm soaring on her wings, Phoenix using her telekinesis, and Rogue flying thanks to the power she absorbed from Carol Danvers' Ms. Marvel. Unfortunately, no prototype or beta of the game has surfaced online to date, keeping the gameplay mechanics a mystery. As a side note, with Marvel Studios constantly evolving its cinematic universe, wouldn't it be something if they wrote out Brie Larson's Captain Marvel by having Anna Paquin's Rogue steal her powers in Secret Wars? It would be a fitting nod to the comics and an exciting twist for fans. This wouldn't be the last attempt to bring the world of Homo Superior to the Mega Drive line of consoles, but as with mutations themselves, not all projects turn out pretty. The next and final endeavour would require the power of the aptly named 32X, Sega's add-on for the Genesis that aimed to enhance its capabilities. Despite the potential of the 32X, this attempt to capture the X-Men's adventures would also face challenges, ultimately marking the end of their journey on the Mega Drive platform. This game, X-Men Mind Games, was developed by Scavenger and set to be published by Sega. Scavenger's brief history in game development includes just two titles, both released in 1996, Amok and Scorcher, ironically names that could easily belong to members of the X-Men. However, these games are most remembered for the lawsuit that followed, where Scavenger sued their publisher GT Interactive for failing to pay them, ultimately winning a $1.9 million settlement. As for X-Men Mind Games, the box art found on the Lost Media Wiki offers a tantalising glimpse of what might have been. It features Wolverine, Rogue, Iceman and Bishop standing against a backdrop of television monitors, all displaying the sinister face of Arcade, a notorious X-Men villain known for his deadly game-themed traps. This imagery suggests that the game would have centered around Arcade's twisted challenges, offering a unique and potentially thrilling experience for players. Unfortunately, with the demise of the 32X and the legal troubles surrounding Scavenger, X-Men Mind Games never made it to store shelves, leaving fans to wonder what could have been. X-Men Mind Games was advertised and promoted at E3 in 1995, but it's not difficult to understand why the game never saw the light of day. The Sega 32X was a global disaster for the company, creating a fragmented market and splitting Sega's focus. On the one hand, they were trying to extend the life of their legacy consoles through add-ons like the 32X, while on the other, they were gearing up for the next generation of gaming with compact disc-based 32-bit machines like the Sega Saturn. The problem was that both the 32X and the Saturn were aimed at the same audience, creating confusion and diluting Sega's efforts. Whether Sega realised it or not, the Saturn was already competing for the same gamers, rendering the 32X obsolete almost as soon as it was launched. In this chaotic environment, it's no surprise that X-Men Mind Games, despite the initial hype, ended up being one of the many casualties of Sega's overextended ambitions. In August 2009, an early build of X-Men Mind Games was uploaded online, giving fans a glimpse of what could have been. While magazine scans have indicated that Wolverine would have been a playable character, this early build only features Bishop as the protagonist. The available playthrough showcases Bishop wielding his massive rifle in pre-rendered glory as he navigates through a couple of intriguing levels. The first level is a carnival-like setting, likely a trap or challenge set by the villain Arcade. The second is a sewer area, though water physics had not yet been implemented. The game's camera remains fixed, allowing Bishop to explore in multiple directions, left, right, forward and backwards, reminiscent of the gameplay in the Atari Lynx title Electro Cop. In these two titles, the player encounters no enemies, leaving the exploration somewhat uneventful. However, the action picks up in a ninja temple level where Bishop engages in combat against what might be members of the Hand, or possibly another ninja clan from Marvel lore. Interestingly, instead of relying solely on his rifle for ranged attacks, Bishop primarily uses it as a blunt weapon, smacking around the pyjama-clad enemies. Although Bishop does have a projectile attack, it seems more efficient to deal with foes by bashing them with the back of his blaster. Another level found in the build features Bishop exploring what appears to be a giant toy house, or perhaps he's been shrunk down to size, where he battles toy-like enemies that evoke a mix of Toy Story rejects and characters from Clockwork Knight. This eclectic mix of environments and enemies suggests that X-Men Mind Games would have offered a unique and varied experience, blending different genres and styles in a way that could have set it apart from other X-Men titles. Unfortunately, with the 32X's demise and the game's developmental challenges, Mind Games never had the chance to fully realise its potential. It's easy to speculate how the other characters in X-Men Mind Games might have played based on their iconic abilities. Wolverine, for instance, would have almost certainly have unleashed his ferocious berserker rage, tearing through enemies with his adamantium claws in a flurry of slashing attacks. His gameplay would have likely focused on close quarters combat, making him a formidable brawler in the lineup. Iceman, on the other hand, would have likely been the team's ranged specialist, using his mutant powers to launch ice-based attacks from a distance. With some creative development, Iceman could have been given Sub-Zero inspired freezing abilities, allowing him to immobilize groups of enemies and control the battlefield. A perfect solution for crowd control scenarios. Rogue might have been designed as a straightforward brawler, using her super strength and durability to pummel opponents. However, the real potential in her gameplay could have been the ability to absorb powers of her enemies, similar to how Kirby operates in his many Nintendo adventures. Imagine Rogue adapting her fighting style mid-battle by taking on the abilities of those she defeats, adding a layer of strategy and variety to her combat approach. This mechanic would have not only paid homage to her comic book powers, but also added a dynamic and unpredictable element to the game, making her one of the most versatile and exciting characters to play. Incorporating these distinct playstyles for each character would have made X-Men Mind Games a diverse and engaging experience, allowing players to switch between different mutants to tackle various challenges. While the game never came to fruition, imagining how these iconic characters could have been brought to life in a video game setting highlights the missed potential of this cancelled title. While unfortunately it doesn't seem like we're going to get to enjoy these ones at home anytime soon, don't forget at least I can save up to 90% off of thousands of games simply by using my affiliate link via the pinned comments, including on many classics and modern heavy hitters such as Tekken 8 and Street Fighter 6. Or if you really like this channel and want to support these videos in a more personal way, you can access my behind the scenes cosplay library via Patreon, or as of recently simply by hitting that YouTube join button and becoming a member. Thank you all, and I'll see you soon.